Welcome back. This is lesson 12 in our series. And this time we're going to take a little bit different direction. We're going to go into the textbook and we're going to begin to look at some of the exercises that are laid out in there. I'm going to embellish them a bit. For instance, the first project that we have students do is making a tool handle. Well, I'm going to do one, but it's going to be a better one. It's going to be sort of like these tools here. These are handles I've made for tools we have in the classroom. This parting tool has an oak handle, so I'm going to make an oak handle for one of my students who asked me to do it. So here's the project. I've made this scraper, bowl scraper, and we're going to put a handle on it made out of this piece of well-dried oak. I went to the bandsaw and tried to square it up a little bit, but we'll have to do a lot of work on the lathe with that. I'm going to turn it around, get a tenon on it, put it in our 4-jaw chuck. So I've got a good hold on one end so that I can go into the other end and immediately drill a hole that'll accommodate this tenon. Once the hole is in, we're going to hold it from the tailstock side by the hole so we are dead centered on the handle. Finish turning it around, get a ferrule on. I typically put it on with just CA glue, but we'll get a ferrule so we can hold that wood from splitting. And then we'll do some shaping. Ultimately, a little bit of sanding. I'll use strips of paper like this to get out any of the ripples that I may have put in with my tools. And then I'll go to a reciprocal sander like this for the purposes of just smoothing out the surface. We're not going to go very fine because tool handles need to be rough enough that we can hang on to them. So I'll finish it up by sticking the tool in with a 2-part epoxy. So that's the steps we're going to go through. So let's go to the lathe, get the piece between centers and get it ready to put in the chuck. At the lathe, I've taken my piece of rough oak. I went to the bandsaw before we got started and tried to square this up a little bit. I was mainly concerned with squaring the ends up so that as we hold it between centers, it's as well held as we can. I also measured the diameters on both ends, and since this one's larger, this is the end that's going to go into the chuck. I need at least 2 inches, and my smallest dimension here is right about 2 inches, so we're going to be fine for getting this into a chuck. So my first thing is to do is get this roughly round, get a tenon sort of on this end, and then flip the piece around, put it in the chuck, go to step 2. So speed set around 1800 RPM, my tool rest is clear. Because I'm going to be making a bunch of large chips with my spindle roughing gouge, I've chosen to wear a full face shield here just to protect myself from flying debris. So let's get it sort of round and see what happens. It's not all round, that's fine. I've got my tenon, I've got this area worked. This will be easier to get to once I flip it around. So into the chuck and continue on. This is going to be a nice piece of oak. It's going to be an interesting handle. A little spalting going on here, which will be a nice decorative thing if it stays. Hope it does. Let's see how it goes. So off into the chuck. Holding this very lightly just gives me a free hand for tightening this down here. So I've got a tenon, I've got the shoulder squared off so it'll sit nicely in here without any pressure from the tailstock. As tight as I can get it. Tighten both holes, we're good to go. Now I'll bring this up, lock the tailstock down, and I'm going to finish roughing it round, but not completing round because I want to drill the hole and use it to center up the handle eventually. So let's finish just getting it balanced. Easy said. Here we go. That's good enough for now. In fact, it's almost round. These defects will go away in time. So I want to drill a hole first. And the reason for the hole is that's where the tang of the tool is going to fit. But I want the handle concentric to that hole. So the hole goes next. Why a chuck? So I can get to doing a hole here. So let me change out my live center for a special type of drill bit. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I have some drill bits here. I know the diameter of this bit is going to be larger than the cross section of that tang, so it'll be perfect. I've measured ahead of time. This has a Morse taper on the end of it, so I don't need a Jacobs chuck. It fits right into the tailstock of the lathe. These are really handy to have. So I'm going to come up here, lock off my tailstock, drop my speed. That's about 500 RPM. It's good drilling speed. Tailstock is locked off. And this is centering right into that hole the live center made. And I know how deep I need to go. And I'm going to stop, back it out every now and then, clear the chips. One thing when you're drilling holes, hear the whining? There's two things we can do here. If you're bothered by that noise, it's really easy just to wax the drill bit, kills the noise, and you can continue on. I've got a hole about this deep. Rather than sit and twisting this thing in and out, it's quite possible I can literally just walk this in because the hole is already centered. So I can do this. So let's extract the drill bit. I'm going to replace it with a cone-shaped live center, purpose of which is to set inside that hole and to center up the project. Now see, this is a little uneven at this end. I'm going to fix that later. But now I need to turn this down so that I can fit a ferrule over that. So I'm going to measure the inside of the brass ferrule and turn it so that this fits. Let me get the ferrule. It's my ferrule. I buy brass tubing in 12-foot lengths and cut it off. This is a 1 inch. Inside diameter, whatever it is, there it is. And now I need to reduce this to that diameter. So I'm going to make the ferrule fit next. That's my next step. So right here, it's going to be where that ferrule goes. I'm going to have it protrude beyond the end of the wood just very slightly. So when I finish up the project, you'll see that that becomes something that's very useful. So let's turn this down. I need to know how long is this ferrule first. And there is how long it needs to be. And I can turn this down very easily with my parting tool. Speed back up. Too much. It's nice having a digital display on the lathe, because I know I want it around 1800, and I can set it that way. Typical parting cut. Resting the edge on the wood, rolling it in. And I actually can plane right across here if I wanted to. How close am I? I got about another 1/8 of an inch down to go. About like that. And I'm trying to get it as straight and square as I can. A little fatter out here on the end, I don't want that. There we go. Let's see what it looks like now. Oh, so close. I could probably force it on, but I want just a little room for the glue. So I'm going to take a little bit more. And right now, I'm actually using the parting tool in a scraping mode, tip straight in. I don't want much off. And a rough surface down inside here is a good idea for the glue to bite into. And yeah, a little bit more. That's it. We're ready to glue on the ferrule. So I'm going to unscrew this whole project from the lathe, leave it in the chuck because I don't want to lose that registration. Stand it up on end, put some glue inside of this, slip it on, and then wait for the glue to dry. So I'm going to stand it up, you can watch me glue it on, and then we'll disappear while the glue dries. It's a tight fit. That's wonderful. I'm going to take a mallet and drive this on after I get a little glue down into this slot. So I'm going to get a mallet. I'm going to use some CA glue to glue this in place, and then we'll just wait for the glue to dry. Let me get my makings here and a mallet to drive this down. It'll have to be a wooden mallet because otherwise I'll dent and damage the edge of this brass. So I've got to go get a mallet. I've got the project standing up here on end. Got my ferrule. I roughed up the inside of the brass so I have better tooth for the glue. Little glue around the outside. Let this run down. I have always used CA for this process and it seems to work just fine. So that ferrule slides over there. And I'm going to put a little bead around the inside and let it run down inside the wood. And what we now have to do is wait for the CA to harden, and I'll put it back on the lathe again. Glue set, the ferrule's on here nice and tight, so we're ready to go on and shape the handle. Let me show you the inside. I've actually set the ferrule higher than the wood. It's going to create an area in here when I apply epoxy, inserting the tang of the tool. That'll give it a place to build up in there. So that's kind of a nice thing to do. You may want to set deeper or shallower ones, but I tend to do about like that. So this goes back onto the lathe now. And we're going to shape a handle. Bring up my tailstock, lock it down. It's holding against the wood inside, not against the brass. This is kind of the shape I'm going to be shooting for. I've got the ferrule. I'll put a little bit of a feature here. The handle be tapered. I'll put a little bit of design on it. It may be just a little bit longer than that because this is a heavier duty scraper, so more length will be useful. But not this big around. It'll be hard to get your hand around it. So this fits my hand pretty well, so I'm going to use that as a guideline for the diameter that I'm shooting for. So my first thing is now get this shape, bring it down, and begin to shape. This is all going to be done by eye. Tool rest in place. Tight. Everything's tight. We're running free and clear. So back to my spindle roughing gouge to take away some more mass. Still at the same speed. I know from here to here I want a gentle taper. I'll leave this fat until a little later on. And I don't like that stuff in my face. So I'm going to go back to my face shield. How do you get a taper on a piece of wood? Well, I can move the tool more slowly as I come down here, thus cutting more wood. I can push harder as I come down here. And to get the taper angle I want, what about setting the tool rest to match the angle that you're shooting for? And then as I ride my finger along here, I'll be following the taper I'm shooting for. So I've just offset my tool rest by 2 or 3 degrees. A little farther out here, a little closer in here, and if I use my finger on the back of this tool rest, it'll help me achieve the taper I'm shooting for. So here we go back to work again. So the taper looks pretty good. So now my goal is to get at any lumps and bumps that I left in here by my rapid movement. So I'm going to take a few more cuts with this tool. And my goal now is to go slowly and try to find any irregulars, like right here. I need to get that spot fixed. So now it's finer work. Cleaning it up, you notice I'm taking much lighter cuts and much slower cuts. So that spiral groovy effect from moving too fast has disappeared. The surface for a piece of oak like this is about as good as I'm going to get right at the moment. That little piece of spalting that's showing through here is still there. It's kind of nice. I like keeping that. So now I want to shape down here. This is fatter than I want, and I want a different curve. So I'm going to take a little bit off of this and then change to a different tool for the shaping purposes. So, sorry about the noise. But since I'm working here, I want to get the tool rest positioned so that the strongest portion of it is right under where I'm working. So that means the center of the shaft is underneath this area. Out on the end of these tool rests, they tend to vibrate a little bit, so I want to avoid that. So I move the tool rest down so I have good support right where I'm going to be working. A little roughing gouge work, and then maybe a different tool. I'm turning the tool over a little bit. It's getting dull in the center, so I'm going to use the side a little bit. It's still sharp. Well, that looks about the size I would like it to be. This is going to have to go away, so I need to do a little cove cut in there, and this is not the tool for that. I could use my skew chisel, I suppose, at least to clean up this end. Little end cut. I'm doing that to get down to where the glue is and get that inside corner totally clean from any glue, because when I begin to finish this, that glue won't look really nice. So I think that rounding this and rounding this is really good for a shallow fluted gouge. So I'm going to go get one. Be right back. Went and got my shallow fluted gouge, went and sharpened it. Oak is a tough wood to work with sometimes because it's so stringy. So what I'm going to do is roll this over here, create a cove on this end, and then fix this shape here. I don't much care for that. So a little bit of a bead here. Okay, I want a little more rounded. That looks good on that end. This end down here, I'm going to make this into a cove. It's pivoting around my thumb on the left hand, using my whole body to shape this curve. Change foot position because I need to go farther. And I can fix that later, but I want to finish this curve here. Maybe a little bit more rounded. Think of this as a very long bead. Yeah, okay. So let's finish now the shaft of the tool. And I think what I'm going to do now is change tools again. I want a smooth surface here as best I can get. So I'm going to move the tool rest down to where I'm working. And the handle's about here. And I want to smooth this. And so this is a planing cut with my skew chisel. This does several things. Smooths out the surface. Reduces the amount of sanding I have to do. So this area here I've used a skew on. This area up here I have not. It's probably difficult for you to see it, but to me this is significantly smoother than here. So now I'll continue that smoothing cut closer and closer towards the headstock. Same planing cut. I'm leaving a little bit of mess right here, so I'll stand it up and do a V-cut. Just to get rid of that bad wood there. Now back to my cut. Cleans that up, a little bit of sanding in there, I'll take care of that corner. Now let's finish off the end of the handle. Looking pretty good. I'm going to establish where the end is going to be. I guess I'll make it right there. Oops, little run back. Well, that's okay because I'm going to round this off anyway. More shaping to do here. Let's take the parting tool and open this up a little bit. What I've done is to give myself room to work all the way around the end except for the very center. I'm going to take that down even tinier in a few minutes. But right now I want to just round this off as best I can. Center the tool rest up here, which is where I would like to work. And I'm going to do this like that. So I think a little decoration down here wouldn't be a bad idea. But let's do just a bit of sanding first and then come back and do the decoration. Tool rest out. Let me bring up my sanding supplies and let's get this a little bit smoother. All right, I've gone and got some sanding supplies. I've got some sanding discs, 120, 180, and 220 with a reciprocal sander. But I also picked up a piece of soft, flexible sandpaper strip. And that's a little wider than I like, so we'll get rid of part of it. And I'm going to sand this. Now, if I was home, I would have my dust collection turned on here, but we're not set up on this particular lathe in the classroom that way. So let me do just a quick sanding. By holding this at an angle, I should blend out any remaining tool marks on here. This is 180, probably sufficient. Same thing up here. Come around these corners. And I wanted to get in here and clean this up because I didn't do that with my tool. Just want to take that little corner off. It's gone now. I do a lot of blending with 180. Now I come over all the way to the end and do most of the end, taking those tool marks out of here, down to where I parted anyway. Let's see what we've got. Oh, that feature's still there, and that's nice. I'm going to put a little decorative mark on here just because I want to. So I'm going to put my tool rest back in. I'm going to use my skew chisel to give me a few little grooves. Maybe 3. Oh, maybe 4. And I'm going to use a burning wire to complete this project. Speed up. Burning wires always have handles. If you ever wrap it around your finger, you'll be a 9-digit turner pretty soon. So we're going to lay that over the top, hold the handle, and watch for smoke. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, burning it like this has raised the grain to some extent, so as I go to the next sanding grit, that burr that's been raised will easily go away. We just did 180, so we don't need to do the 180. Let's go to the 220, and that's as fine as I would ever go on a tool handle. Reciprocal sanders blend the circular patterns, and so we don't have the striations from sanding showing near as much. Run one edge of it against the tool handle, and just slide it down. And the burn lines actually get cleaned up a little bit. They begin to look nicer because the edges are sharper and cleaner. Little bump right in here. And down here. Now I like to sand the brass also, because I want that nice shiny brass. I don't want that old brass look. So my 220 grit on the brass. Well, it's nice and shiny. Catch the edge of it here a second. Now one could stop right there and say we have a tool handle ready to go just to glue in. I'm going to check that spot right in here a little bit. But I'm going to do one more surface on this thing. I'm going to use what's called Triple E, which is a little abrasive in a wax base that'll bring up a little polish to this, keep it a little smooth, and also give the oak a little bit more color at the same time because of the wax. Triple E. Triple E Ultra Shine. Speed's low. And I'm going to put it on just with a piece of blue paper towel. And I'm avoiding the brass till the very end, because this will work really great on the brass. But what it ends up doing is leaving a black smudge on my paper towel, which means I have to throw it away immediately thereafter. Now, right onto the brass because it'll polish it up, but it leaves black, and I have to now discard that. So let's clean the brass first. Paper towel. You see, as I clean it, I have to keep changing to a clean portion of the towel each time until that's all nice and shiny. Now, Polish up the wood a little bit. Keeping a little pressure against this as I go. Actually leaning back almost. As you see, the wax is coming off a lot into the paper towel. Now, I don't do any more than that. This gives me a handle I can hold on to. It gives it a nice look, and it's rough enough that I can grip it. So now I'm ready to finish parting this off. And yes, I have to do this end by hand, but it's a small area and I can easily do that. So now I'm going to reduce this down and part it off, get this out of the way, bring back my tool rest. I'd like to get the center of the tool rest here. Well, I am pretty close actually. That's nice. And what I'm going to do is use my skew chisel to bring this down a little bit more. Also keeping a nice surface down in here as I go. This is a series of V-cuts. I'm taking it for the waist side. And now I'm about a 1/16 of an inch still holding this up, so I don't have much wood there. If I cut this all the way through, this could go flying unless I hang on to it. So I'm going to hold it with the right hand, guide the tool with my thumb, and part it off. And then reach over and hit the power switch. Just like that. And on the end, I've got just a little bit of torn fibers, which I easily can cut off with the tip of my skew chisel, using it like a carving gouge. And this area here has to get finished just like I did the other. So I can go back to my triple E on this end. Clean part of the towel, if there is any. There's one. Handle, ready to mount a tool in. And my customer, I hope, will be happy. So I'm going to go stand this tool up. I'm going to fill this hole with 2-part epoxy about halfway and drop the tool in. The epoxy will lock that into place and I will wait. It's 5-minute epoxy. That means in 5 minutes it's partially set. Doesn't mean it's hard. I'm going to wait a full 24 hours before I even consider giving it to somebody. There is another step I'm going to do. Right before I put the epoxy in, I'm going to wax all of this surface, even down onto this wood. The reason is, if I get sloppy with my epoxy and it accidentally runs over, it will not bind to the wax surface, and I can take my fingernail and literally chip it off. So if I get messy, that's my guard against being a klutz. So I think we'll go to the back table again, mix up the 2-part epoxy, and drop a handle in there so you can see this completed project. Back to the table. Back of the workbench again. Here's our handle. When the blade gets put in here with epoxy, it's going to drop in here like this, and I'm going to fill this hole about 2/3 full and let the shaft displace the epoxy up over the top with this brass. Now to get this thing vertical and keep it vertical, I'm going to put it in the vise here, and by looking at it carefully, I'm going to try just to make sure the handle is straight as I can get it. At home, I might have a tube to set this in. So I'm going to mix up my epoxy. I'm using the 5-minute quick set. And as I said before, 5 minutes isn't really always 5 minutes. It means it's going to tack in about 5, but not be totally hard for some longer period of time. So, nice thing about this, it's a 1-to-1 mix. And so I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Cap it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.5, 10. And that's close enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm just going to mix this up thoroughly. I've heard of people finding this epoxy not working, and it's because they failed to mix accurately. So you need a lot of stirring. It's white now, cloudy. It will dry clear. And so what I'm going to do now, I've waxed all of this. Oops, dropped my stir stick. I'm literally going to pour this into the hole. And yeah, I guessed at how much. I can see the hole about half filled because I can look down in there and see it. So I'm going to have overflow, which is good. And on warm days, 5 minutes is 5 minutes. On cooler days, 5 minutes could be longer. I can tell when it starts to set, this will start getting warm. So I leave my stir stick in here. This gives me a test. So for me to do this, I've got my paper towel in hand to wipe up my excess. Ready to go. In goes the tool. And out comes the epoxy. Just like that. Now it's running down the side, so I'll wipe it off. Make sure the blade is square. And when that epoxy sets, I may do a little bit more cleaning, but for all practical purposes, the tool is done. So tool handles, pretty much. Get a piece of stock, turn it around, make the right size hole, get yourself some epoxy. Always add a ferrule if you can. It keeps the wood from this area from accidentally splitting. So thanks for watching. Another video coming up soon. Next time we're going to look at pen turning.